Nietzsche believed that the human being is not an end, but a transition, that we're stuck between what we are, comfortable, conditioned, predictable, and what we could become, something far greater. He called this ideal of transformation the Übermensch, the Superman, not a comic book hero, but a kind of person who breaks free from mediocrity, rejects ready-made truths, and builds their own values with courage, clarity, and inner strength. For Nietzsche, becoming this Superman is the only way to give life meaning in a world where God, and with him, the old values, no longer rule. But he knew most people will choose safety over freedom. They'll follow the crowd, repeat ideas without thinking, and call that a good life. This video is for those who want more, for those who feel like they're living below their potential, for those ready to face uncomfortable truths, dangerous ideas, and maybe come out the other side transformed. You're about to discover 20 powerful philosophical ideas from Nietzsche, not meant to comfort you, but to wake you up. If you're ready to begin your own transformation, let's go. The concept of the Übermensch or Overman is one of the most challenging and most misunderstood ideas in Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy. And for good reason. It doesn't describe some average human type, nor is it a hero in the popular sense. The Übermensch is an ideal of existential self-overcoming. He represents the person who breaks free from inherited values and creates, from within himself, a new way of living, more authentic, freer, and more life-affirming. Nietzsche introduces this concept mainly in his book Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where the prophet Zarathustra makes a striking statement. Man is a rope stretched between the animal and the overman, a rope over an abyss. That metaphor is the key. Humanity, as we know it, is in transition. We are a bridge, not a destination. The Übermensch is the one who crosses that bridge. But what does that really mean in practice? It means that we still live, for the most part, under the chains of inherited values, religious beliefs that glorify suffering, morals that suppress our instincts, traditions that crush individuality. For Nietzsche, these values have become decayed. The Übermensch is the person who re-evaluates and goes beyond those values, who has the courage to tear them down and create new ones, not based on dogma, but based on a full embrace of life. Nietzsche believed that Western culture lived under what he called a slave morality, a morality rooted in guilt, resentment, and the denial of vital energy. It doesn't celebrate strength, but sacrifice. It doesn't embrace life, but glorifies martyrdom. The Übermensch refuses to live by this system. He doesn't seek approval, obedience, or self-sacrifice for someone else's ideals. On the contrary, he asserts his own will, his own power, his unique existence, even if that means being misunderstood or standing alone. There is no roadmap or formula to become an Übermensch. It's not about following rules, it's an inner demand. Nietzsche wrote, "Become who you are." That phrase is the heartbeat of the Übermensch. He doesn't copy anyone. He doesn't follow leaders. He listens to himself, dives deep into his own nature, and creates a completely original path. That's why the Übermensch isn't a collective project. It's a radical act of self-transformation. But let's be clear, the Übermensch is not a tyrant. That's a common misunderstanding. Nietzsche never praised domination over others. The real power of the Übermensch is self-mastery. He's the one who conquered his own fears, the comfort of conformity, and the addiction to resentment. He doesn't need to control the world. He has already conquered his own spirit. And that path is anything but easy. Nietzsche explained it through what he called the 3 transformations of the spirit: the camel, the lion, and the child. The spirit begins as a camel, burdened by traditions, beliefs, and expectations. Then it becomes a lion, rebelling and saying no to all those chains. But just saying no isn't enough. Finally, the lion becomes a child, the symbol of creative innocence, playful freedom, and the ability to say yes and create new values. The Übermensch is that spirit who, after rejecting old systems, creates something new. And that's why he's closely tied to Nietzsche's idea of the will to power, Wille zur Macht. This isn't a desire for political or authoritarian power. It's the natural drive of life to grow, to intensify, to express itself. It's the creative force of existence. The Übermensch lives in alignment with that force. He doesn't just react to the world, he transforms it from within. Nietzsche also offered a powerful test to see if someone is truly aligned with this ideal: the eternal return. Imagine that every moment of your life, every choice, every pain, every gesture, had to be repeated forever, exactly the same. Would you embrace that repetition with joy, or would you fall into despair? The Übermensch lives so fully and affirmatively that he could desire the eternal return of his life. He doesn't hide in regret or hope for some future salvation. He's fully present, right here, right now. This vision demands brutal courage, because living as the Übermensch isn't about having an easier life, it's about living with more responsibility. It means being the author of your own story. It means letting go of excuses, dropping the need for external validation, and creating value where there used to be only blind obedience. It means looking into the abyss and not looking away. Nietzsche knew that few would be able to handle this calling. That's why the Übermensch's path is a lonely one. Most people will prefer the comfort of inherited beliefs. They'll want to fit in, be liked, and play it safe. But those who hear this inner call know there's no going back. Real growth requires breaking away. That's why the Übermensch is not a perfect figure. He's not the strongest in a physical sense, or the smartest by cultural standards. He is the one who created himself, who dared to be unique in a world that demands copies, who had the guts to live without guarantees, without dogmas, without masks. In the end, Nietzsche isn't asking us to become something beyond human, but to finally become fully human. Not to live a life that's small, submissive, or bitter, but a life that's elevated, creative, and real. The Übermensch is the echo of greatness that already lives within each of us, just waiting for the courage to be awakened. Nietzsche believed that something fundamental had to happen to humanity, a deep break from the values that had guided our existence up until now. Not an armed revolution, but an ethical one. Not political, but existential. He called this process the revaluation of all values, Umwertung aller Werte, one of the deepest pillars of his philosophy. But what does that actually mean? What is revaluing? The word might sound technical, but the idea behind it is raw and powerful. To revalue means to radically question and rethink the values we've inherited, the ones that tell us what's right or wrong, noble or shameful, high or low. According to Nietzsche, many of these values didn't come from a true love of life, but from resentment, weakness, and fear. In his view, the dominant values of Western society were shaped by a morality that denies life. This is especially seen in traditional Christian morality, which glorifies humility, sacrifice, obedience, and suffering as the highest virtues. That's why Nietzsche declared, "God is dead." He wasn't celebrating atheism. He was pointing out the collapse of a belief system that no longer had the strength to support modern life. The death of God marked the end of an absolute foundation and the beginning of a void. In that void, Nietzsche saw an opportunity, but before creation comes destruction. Revaluation begins with the courage to question the values we were taught since childhood. Values we wear as if they were natural, but that deep down keep us from growing. How many times have we held ourselves back out of guilt, suppressed desire in the name of virtue, silenced ourselves just to be accepted? Nietzsche wanted us to see all of that with critical eyes. He exposed what he called slave morality, a value system born not from strength, but from weakness. He explains this in depth in his book, The Genealogy of Morals, where he shows how the resentful and powerless created a morality that flipped everything upside down. The strong became villains, the weak became heroes. Desire became sin. Power became danger. Life became a test for some afterlife. Behind compassion, humility, and obedience, Nietzsche often saw a disguised rejection of life. And that's the core issue. For him, any value that denies instincts, creative force, the body, or joy must be overcome. Life shouldn't be lived as a burden or as a waiting room for rewards in another world. It should be embraced here and now, with intensity. That's where the positive side of revaluation comes in. Nietzsche didn't just want us to destroy old values. He challenged us to create new ones from a more honest source. Life itself, lived with intensity, courage, and creativity. The person who does this is the one moving toward becoming the Übermensch. The person who has the strength to let go of inherited certainties and create a new way of living, even if it means walking alone. But creating new values doesn't mean making up random rules. It means living in a way where life becomes an expression of strength, not submission. It means staying true to your uniqueness, honoring the body, your feelings, and your creative will. It's turning pain into strength, chaos into meaning, and suffering into beauty. Nietzsche knew this wouldn't be for everyone. In fact, he understood that most people would resist revaluation. It's easier to stick to ready-made values than to face their emptiness. It's more comfortable to stay in a familiar system, even an oppressive one, than to carry the weight of creating your own path. But he believed the future would demand exactly that. Only a new way of valuing things could lift us out of moral decay, out of nihilism, and push us toward fully affirming life. Revaluation, then, is both an ethical and an aesthetic demand. It calls for a shift in perspective. Instead of seeing the world through fear and guilt, we see it through strength and creativity. Instead of denying life for the sake of distant ideals, we live it fully and meaningfully. As Nietzsche wrote in Ecce Homo, "I was the first to discover the truth by denying the values that had been called values until now." For Nietzsche, nihilism was the starting point, the moment we realize old values no longer hold up, that the things we once believed in, God, morality, absolute truth, have collapsed. But nihilism isn't the end. It's the beginning of revaluation. Nietzsche didn't want to leave us in despair. He wanted to push us to create meaning from within, meaning that doesn't shrink us, but expands us. It's important to note that revaluation doesn't happen from the outside in. It's not a political movement or a new ideology. It happens inside the individual, in those private moments when we choose to stop living by what others expect and start living by what feels true. It takes courage, the courage to say no to a life that was handed down to us, and yes to a life we create. And maybe the hardest part, it takes radical responsibility. Because creating new values means taking the risk of living without guarantees, without dogmas, without absolute truths to fall back on. It means walking on your own, without anyone to blame if you stumble. But it also means living with intensity, with freedom, and with authenticity. Nietzsche doesn't offer comfort. He offers a challenge. The revaluation of all values is the proposal of a quiet, deep revolution, one that begins inside each of us. It's not something imposed, it's something earned. Not through force, but through clarity. Not through hate, but through the will to live differently. And maybe that's why his philosophy feels so relevant and so urgent today. In times of meaning, crises, mechanical lives, and fragile truths, Nietzsche's question still echoes. Are you living by values you chose, or just repeating what you were taught? Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, or Superman, is often misunderstood. Many people, at first glance, imagine an arrogant, authoritarian, maybe even cruel figure, a kind of tyrant justified by philosophy. But that completely distorts Nietzsche's message and misses the depth of what he actually meant. The Übermensch is not someone who dominates others. First and foremost, he is someone who masters himself. And that changes everything. Nietzsche didn't write to empower tyrants. He wrote to free individuals. The Übermensch is not a power-hungry politician or a ruthless warrior. He doesn't seek to conquer land or control people. His power doesn't come from the outside, it comes from within. He rules over his impulses, his fears, and his need for approval. He's strong because he doesn't need to push others down to feel powerful. This misunderstanding often comes from how the word Superman is casually used. In some literal translations, people assume Übermensch means someone above others, superior in status or rank. But Nietzsche wasn't talking about social, moral, or racial superiority. He was talking about an existential leap, a higher way of being that requires self-overcoming, not domination. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche describes the Übermensch as someone who rises above a decaying human condition, someone who transcends inherited values and creates their own from inner strength. A tyrant forces his values onto others. The Übermensch creates values within himself. A tyrant demands obedience. The Übermensch refuses to blindly obey or to be blindly obeyed. He doesn't want followers. He wants free individuals capable of their own transformation. Nietzsche was fully aware of the risk. Presenting a figure as powerful as the Übermensch, he knew he'd be misunderstood, especially by those who confuse strength with violence and willpower with domination. That's why he insists, true strength is about transforming yourself, not controlling others. There's a key passage in Zarathustra where Nietzsche writes, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded. That is the nature of things." In other words, real power lies in inner discipline, in being able to guide your life from within. The Übermensch is not at war with others. He fights the hardest battle of all, the battle within. Against mechanical habits, against the pull of the herd, against the childish need to be liked by everyone. And that battle never ends. Nietzsche didn't idealize a perfect or unreachable being. For him, being the Übermensch is a constant process of self-overcoming, not a final destination. The moment someone believes they've arrived, they've stopped growing. The Übermensch is the one who keeps evolving, even at the peak. This is what makes the difference so powerful. A tyrant imposes order because he fears chaos. The Übermensch embraces chaos and turns it into creativity. He doesn't hide behind dogmas or rigid systems. He lives in uncertainty, takes risks, and chooses freedom. And that's exactly why many fear him. He doesn't fit in, he doesn't bow, he can't be tamed. For Nietzsche, the modern world is full of small tyrannies, systems telling us how to live, what to think, what to want. But the most subtle and paralyzing tyranny is the one we put on ourselves when we live by standards we never chose. The Übermensch breaks free from this internal prison. He says no to what was placed upon him, and a powerful yes to what arises from within. And he doesn't do this out of pride or vanity. He does it to live with authenticity, because he refuses to go through life as someone else's echo, because he knows that no one can hand him meaning, and so he decides to create it. That's his real strength. He doesn't need anyone else to be whole. This is why the Übermensch is deeply ethical, though not in the traditional sense. He doesn't follow a universal moral code, but he doesn't live in chaos either. He creates his own ethical path, rooted in life, affirmation, and honesty with himself. He doesn't act out of duty, but out of loyalty to who he is. And that kind of ethics is demanding. It doesn't allow for self-deception. It requires clarity, courage, and responsibility. In a world where so many chase external control through money, influence, or force, Nietzsche challenges us with something harder: self-mastery, an inner empire, silent but unshakable. The Übermensch doesn't need the world to kneel before him. He already stands tall in front of the world. Maybe that's why Nietzsche has been misunderstood, and even misused in certain moments of history. His idea of the Übermensch was twisted to justify authoritarian agendas and power cults. But that's a betrayal of his philosophy. Nietzsche was deeply opposed to herd mentality, even when it came from totalitarian states. He didn't see greatness in obedient masses, but in free individuals. His criticism wasn't of human dignity. It was of forced equality that erased individuality. The true Übermensch doesn't lay down rules for others. He takes on the challenge of living authentically in a world that constantly tries to flatten, normalize, and erase difference. He's not a threat. He's an invitation, a figure of inspiration, not domination. Nietzsche didn't want you to become a master of others. He wanted you to stop being a slave to yourself, to look inward with courage, to face your habits, your patterns, your masks, and from there, to build a life that's fuller, more honest, more elevated. Mastering yourself is the hardest challenge of all. It's easy to command others. It's hard to govern your own impulses. It's easy to look strong. It's hard to be strong in the quiet of your own conscience. Nietzsche understood that, and that's why he offered the Übermensch not as a model to copy, but as an ideal to reach for, day by day, within each of us. Few themes in Nietzsche's philosophy are as deeply human and as painful as the solitude of the Übermensch. It's easy to praise the strength, courage, and creativity of this ideal. But Nietzsche doesn't sugarcoat it. The path of self-overcoming isn't popular, comfortable, or easily understood by most people. The Übermensch is the one who breaks away from dominant values. And to break away from the world's values is, inevitably, to break away from the world itself. Throughout his work, Nietzsche invites us to stop being what the world expects us to be. He asks us to let go of herd morality, inherited customs, and cheap certainties. But when someone stands up and says no to what everyone else says yes to, they become a threat. They provoke fear, discomfort, and rejection. They become a stranger, even among their own people. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, solitude is a constant companion. Zarathustra, the prophet of the Übermensch, comes down from the mountain to share his wisdom, only to realize that no one is ready to hear it. His words fall flat. His teachings are misunderstood. So he returns to solitude, not because he despises humanity, but because he knows. Real transformation is a lonely journey. This solitude isn't about physical isolation. It's an existential disconnection. The Übermensch is on a different frequency. He thinks differently. He values things others ignore. He questions what most people accept. That's why he feels like a foreigner, even among close friends. He carries a fire within him that burns too brightly for eyes used to the dark. Nietzsche knew how heavy this path could be. He experienced radical solitude himself. Misunderstood during his life, pushed to the margins of academia, abandoned by friends. His own biography echoes his message. Those who choose to stay true to themselves will pay the price of being misunderstood. Because living like everyone else is easy, living like no one else has dared is the real challenge. And yet, that solitude is what strengthens the spirit. Nietzsche wrote, "Can't bear your solitude, then a world will grow out of you." True creation of values, of meaning, of self, happens when a person stops chasing applause and approval and chooses to live fully within themselves, even in silence, even in pain. The solitude of the Übermensch is not hopeless. It's the solitude of a creator. Just as an artist steps away to compose, a free spirit must retreat in order to rebuild. It's not about rejecting people, but about returning to oneself, a necessary step for rebirth. Nietzsche believed that most people live surrounded, but empty. The Übermensch may be alone, but he's full, whole, faithful to his essence. This solitude is also the natural result of independent thinking. In a world where most people just repeat, the one who thinks for himself becomes a problem. Where everyone follows the path, the one who creates a new one is seen as dangerous. But the danger the Übermensch represents isn't physical, it's symbolic. He questions the foundation of things, and that makes people uncomfortable. It shakes the ground beneath them. But Nietzsche doesn't promote bitter solitude. He doesn't glorify suffering for the sake of it. What he shows is this. Sometimes, to find yourself, you have to lose others, and that loss is real. Giving up social approval, old identities, and comfortable circles, all of that hurts. But that pain is part of the birth of freedom. There's a kind of nobility in this solitude, a quiet dignity in not betraying your truth, even if it means walking alone. The Übermensch doesn't trade his essence for company. He'd rather sit in the emptiness of a cave than wear a mask for the comfort of others. He chooses the silence of integrity over the noise of hypocrisy. Nietzsche doesn't romanticize this path. He knows it's hard. Many times, he writes about the temptation to come down from the heights, to return to mediocrity just to feel less alone. But he also says, he who climbs high must expect to be alone, but the air is purer up there. That higher level of consciousness comes at a cost, but it offers a clarity that can't be found on the ground. For Nietzsche, this solitude is a sign of maturity. Ordinary people fear being alone because they rely on others to validate their lives. The Übermensch is complete, not out of arrogance, but out of fullness. He has become his own source of meaning. He doesn't need the world to say his life is worth living. He lives it so intensely, so truthfully, that that's more than enough. And this solitude is not forever. It's not the end, it's the transition. The goal isn't to be isolated forever, but to become strong enough to connect without losing yourself, to relate without submitting, to love without disappearing. For Nietzsche, true community isn't the herd, it's the meeting of free spirits, but that only happens after each one has been reborn from within. That's why the Übermensch isn't a desperate loner, he's a fertile one. He lives in the desert not because he hates the world, but because he's building a new world inside himself. He knows that to guide others, you must first survive your own darkness. And when he returns, it's not as a master, but as an example that it's possible to live differently. Through his fearless philosophy, Nietzsche shows us that the loneliness of truth is better than the company of lies, that being true to yourself comes at a high cost, but the cost of self-betrayal is even higher. The Übermensch is the one who walks, even alone, who creates, even when rejected, who affirms, even in silence. And maybe this is one of the deepest lessons in all of Nietzsche's thought. Freedom has a price, and that price is solitude. But it's in that solitude that the soul is refined, that new values are born, that, like a child after the lion, the spirit is reborn, ready to create, to play, and to live without fear. For Friedrich Nietzsche, understanding what drives life is more important than just describing it. He wasn't interested in simply analyzing human existence. He wanted to uncover its hidden source, its deepest force. And that's where one of the most powerful and misunderstood ideas in his philosophy comes in. The will to power, or in German, Wille zur Macht. But what exactly is this force? What did Nietzsche really mean? First, let's be clear. The will to power is not about political ambition or a desire to control others. It has nothing to do with external dominance, social control, or institutional authority. Nietzsche isn't talking about the power to rule over people. The will to power is something much more subtle and essential. It's the life force behind everything that lives. It's an ontological force, meaning it's rooted in the very nature of being. It's the force that drives life to express itself, to grow, to become more intense, to transform. The will to power is what makes a seed push through the dirt to become a tree. It's what makes an artist create a masterpiece, even without applause. It's what pushes a thinker to question truths, even when surrounded by dogma. It's the drive for more life, more intensity, more elevation. Nietzsche saw this will as the engine of existence, replacing the will to live proposed by Schopenhauer, which Nietzsche saw as pessimistic and passive. For Schopenhauer, life is suffering, and the only real drive we have is to keep living, even if miserably. Nietzsche rejected that. For him, simply surviving isn't enough. Life should be lived with fullness, with growth, with creative power. That's why the will to power is the will to become more, not just to stay alive. And this force is what drives the Übermensch. The Superman is the highest expression of the will to power. He doesn't live reactively. He lives affirmatively. He doesn't act just to avoid suffering, but to embrace life in its fullness. He's not driven by fear, guilt, or resentment. He's driven by a creative force that turns chaos into form, emptiness into meaning, pain into transformation. Nietzsche makes this clear in his criticism of traditional morality. For him, dominant values, especially those in Judeo-Christian morality, are based on denying life. They praise humility, sacrifice, obedience, and self-denial, everything that suppresses the will to power. When people accept those values, they stop expanding and start shrinking. They become tame, predictable, small. They get spiritually sick. They survive, but they don't thrive. The will to power, then, is the cure for this spiritual sickness. It's the inner call to live higher, fuller, and more true to one's nature. And that call takes courage, because living by the will to power means letting go of the crutches of common morality. It means choosing creation over obedience, boldness over approval. It often means walking alone, but walking with greatness. Nietzsche illustrates this with the example of the artist. For him, the real artist doesn't copy reality. He recreates it. He brings form to chaos. He doesn't reproduce the world. He reinvents it. That creative act is a perfect example of the will to power in motion. It's not about controlling others. It's about shaping your own world with your own hands. Still, this power isn't necessarily violent. It can show up as brute strength, sure, but also as beauty, as sensitivity, as deep thinking. A philosopher who smashes idols with ideas is also being moved by the will to power. So is someone who breaks out of their comfort zone to live according to their truth. Even silence can be a powerful act when it comes from inner strength, not from fear. In his posthumous notes, Nietzsche wrote that the will to power is the essence of life, not preservation, but growth, creation, becoming more. And that's a key point. A life based on preservation is closed off, defensive, fearful. A life based on becoming more is bold, curious, creative, willing to risk. One lives out of fear. The other lives out of courage. But living by the will to power also means accepting the risks that come with it. Because growing hurts. Expanding means facing limits, both outside and within. It means dealing with failure, with rejection, with setbacks. But the Übermensch doesn't avoid these things. He absorbs them. He grows from them. For him, even suffering can become strength. Even pain can become art. That's a crucial idea. The will to power doesn't deny suffering. It reintegrates it into life. While traditional morality tries to avoid pain or explain it as punishment, Nietzsche sees it as part of the process of intensifying life. The Superman is the one who says yes to everything, even the things that hurt, because he knows that they make him more real, more whole, more alive. And here's one of Nietzsche's boldest ideas: the eternal return as the ultimate test of the will to power. Only someone who truly affirms life, someone who lives with such intensity and faithfulness to their essence, could say they'd live their exact life again, over and over, in every detail. That person is driven by the will to power. They live with no regret, no hiding, no self-erasure. Nietzsche believed that the future would depend on this force. In a world without absolutes, without eternal foundations, without God, only the will to power could lead us toward a new way of living. A world of creators, not just followers, of thinkers, not just believers, of humans who have become masters of themselves, not slaves to dead values. Living from this force is a radical challenge, but it also holds a promise, the promise of a life that's more intense, more creative, more free. The will to power doesn't demand perfection, but it demands honesty. It demands that we don't live as shadows of ourselves, that we rise even when we fall, that we reinvent ourselves even when we fail, that we say yes to life in all its pain, all its beauty, all its chaos. Nietzsche doesn't offer us comfort. He offers power. He doesn't give us certainty. He gives us the strength to create it. He doesn't want you to obey. He wants you to bloom. Friedrich Nietzsche gives us a challenge that may sound mysterious at first, but actually holds one of the most powerful ideas in all his philosophy: become who you are. This phrase, found in his book Ecce Homo, sums up the heart of Nietzsche's ethics. An ethic not based on fixed rules, dogmas, or commandments, but on something much more demanding: being true to yourself. But how can someone become who they are? Aren't we already who we are? That's where Nietzsche's genius comes in. For him, almost no one is truly themselves. Most people live as unfinished versions of what others expect from them. We follow social roles, religious rules, family traditions, and outside ideals. We shape ourselves to be accepted, recognized, validated. But in doing so, we drift away from our real selves. We become likable, but empty, polite, but passive, moral, but deeply unfaithful to our uniqueness. Nietzsche saw that Western culture, especially Christian morality and the traditions of guilt, sacrifice, and the denial of desire, had created tamed human beings, cut off from their inner strength. To him, the problem with modern man wasn't a lack of virtue, but a lack of authentic vitality. We live afraid of being who we really are. And that's exactly what the idea of self-overcoming is meant to confront. In Nietzsche's view, self-overcoming isn't a one-time event, it's a way of life. It means living in a constant process of going beyond yourself. It's refusing to stay stuck in who you already are. It's about always evolving, always growing. Like a river that never stays the same, the human being, for Nietzsche, is becoming. A being that is constantly building itself by breaking through its own limits, masks, beliefs, and fears. But here's the key. Self-overcoming isn't about comparing yourself to others. Nietzsche had no respect for the shallow competition of social status. True overcoming is internal, individual, and solitary. It's not about beating others. It's about beating who you were before. It's about looking back and realizing you're no longer the same, that you've grown, that you've let go of what no longer serves you, even if it hurt, even if it cost you relationships, reputation, or a sense of security. To overcome yourself is also an act of courage. It means facing who you really are, without illusions, without excuses, without lying to yourself. Nietzsche believed the average person lives in a comfortable lie, believing they're good when really they've just been tamed, believing they're humble when in truth they're just afraid. Self-overcoming requires shining a light on the darker parts of yourself, revealing your repressed instincts, hidden desires, and resentments disguised as morality. Why does this matter so much? Because for Nietzsche, only those who are faithful to their uniqueness can live a truly elevated life. There's no point in copying other people's values, following worn-out paths, or living by generic rules. Every person is a one-of-a-kind force of nature, and they can only reach greatness by living in alignment with that uniqueness. Life, to Nietzsche, has no given meaning. It gains meaning when you shape it through your own strength, and that's only possible when you break free from the idea of a fixed identity. Nietzsche didn't believe there was some true self waiting to be discovered. In fact, he argued the opposite. Become who you are means you must create yourself. There's no hidden essence. There is only potential waiting to be realized. Your identity isn't something you're given. It's something you build. You weren't born ready. You are a project in progress. This connects directly to Nietzsche's image of the three transformations of the spirit described in Thus Spoke Zarathustra: the camel, the lion, and the child. The spirit begins as a camel, carrying the burdens of the world, duty, tradition, and imposed values. Then it becomes a lion who roars against those burdens, saying no to what oppresses. But it's not enough to destroy, you must create. And so the lion becomes a child a symbol of lightness, freedom, playfulness, and the creation of new values. The path of self-overcoming follows these stages. First, you must realize what you're carrying without knowing why. Then, have the courage to question, resist, and break free. And finally, open yourself to becoming something new. The child doesn't return to the beginning, it rises to a higher level. It's not naive, it's powerful. Because it no longer needs to justify itself, it's free to be. Nietzsche invites us to see ourselves as artists of our own existence. He says, we must make our lives into works of art. And what work of art is made without effort, without mistakes, without starting over? Self-overcoming is a constant process, a commitment to being unfinished, a refusal to become stuck. But it's also a lonely path, because few people can handle the weight of being free. Most prefer to follow ready-made models. Self-overcoming demands that you abandon those models and walk forward, often without a map. Nietzsche knew this creates anxiety, but it's a fertile kind of anxiety, because it's the emptiness of the old that makes space for the new. The Übermensch, the Superman, is someone who lives in constant self-overcoming. He doesn't settle, he doesn't become rigid, he doesn't repeat himself. He's reborn as many times as necessary. He turns failure into strength, pain into wisdom, limits into momentum. He lives intensely because he knows life isn't something to endure, it's something to create. And this may be Nietzsche's greatest lesson. Don't settle for being less than you can be. Don't live a life that isn't truly yours. Don't carry values that don't match your truth. The world is already full of copies. What we're missing are people who are true to their own uniqueness, who dare to live as one-of-a-kind works of art. Self-overcoming isn't just a philosophical luxury, it's a vital need, because the alternative is mediocrity, repetition, and resentment. Nietzsche warns us, if you're not growing, you're rotting, and to grow, in this sense, means to become more and more yourself. Not in a selfish way, but in an authentic one. It means dropping the masks, letting go of fake modesty, having the courage to be great. So, if Nietzsche left us with one personal mission, it's this: become who you are, not who others want you to be, not who you think you should be, but who, deep down, you feel you could be, if only you had the courage to leave comfort behind and embrace your own power to create. Few philosophers challenge the moral and spiritual foundations of the West as boldly as Friedrich Nietzsche. Among his most powerful critiques is his attack on religious morality, especially traditional Christian morality. For Nietzsche, this kind of morality doesn't elevate the human being, it traps them. It denies life, glorifies suffering, and turns resentment into a virtue. That's why it must be overcome, not simply rejected, but transcended, replaced by a new way of living that's more faithful to the vitality of life itself. The Nietzschean Übermensch, or Superman, is the living symbol of this overcoming. To understand this critique, we have to start with one of Nietzsche's key questions. Where do our moral values come from? He doesn't accept easy answers. He wants to dig down to the roots. In his book, The Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche shows that many of the values we now consider good, like humility, obedience, chastity, compassion, and sacrifice, didn't come from strength, but from weakness. These are values born out of the resentment of the powerless, the defeated, those who couldn't assert their will in the world. He calls this slave morality, a system created by the weak to flip the natural order of life. In this system, the strong become evil, the powerful are labeled sinners, desire becomes temptation, and the joy of living becomes something suspicious. Life is no longer something to celebrate. It becomes something to deny. The body is no longer to be embraced, but feared. Earth becomes a place of trial, not fulfillment. Religion, in Nietzsche's view, was the most effective vehicle for this inversion of values, especially historical Christianity. He wrote, "Christianity is a metaphysics of executioners. a doctrine that glorifies suffering, sanctifies weakness, and curses all that is strong, elevated, and life-affirming. But let's be clear, Nietzsche doesn't hate spirituality. He's not attacking faith as a personal or inner experience. What he's fighting is the structure of traditional religious morality, a system of psychological control, a system that makes us feel guilty for our desires, ashamed of our instincts, and afraid of our freedom, a system that domesticates us. Guilt is a central weapon of this morality. You want something? Feel guilty. You think for yourself? Be careful. That might be pride. You want to live fully. That could be vanity. In this context, religious morality doesn't lift the spirit. It suppresses real life. It creates what Nietzsche calls the man of resentment, someone who doesn't act but judges, who doesn't create but condemns, who doesn't live but waits. Nietzsche saw this as a deep form of nihilism, a rejection of everything alive, earthly, and human, a refusal to accept existence as it truly is. Religious morality promises an afterlife, a distant paradise, a future redemption, salvation after death. But in doing so, it pulls us away from the present. It weakens real life in favor of an abstract, unreachable ideal. That's where the Superman comes in. He is the opposite of the resentful moralist. He says yes to life in its entirety, with all its pleasures and pains, joys and tragedies. The Superman doesn't deny the body, the instincts, or the drive for creative power. He doesn't search for a beyond. He creates meaning here, in this world, in this moment. Overcoming religious morality isn't just about criticizing it. It's an act of affirmation. The Superman doesn't simply say, "This is wrong." He says, "There's another way to live, freer, stronger, more honest. A life where you don't need permission to exist, where you don't feel ashamed of what you truly want, where suffering isn't praised, but faced with dignity and turned into power." Nietzsche isn't proposing shallow cynicism. He's not preaching reckless hedonism. What he wants is to reconnect the human being with their true nature, with their instincts, their strength, and their creative energy. For him, instincts aren't sins to be repressed. They're vital expressions to be understood and integrated. The path of the Superman is about becoming whole, not denying who you are. That's why the Superman is also someone who creates their own values. He doesn't wait for someone else to tell him what's right or wrong. He doesn't bow to a list of commandments. He lives with radical responsibility, the responsibility to be the author of his own life. This is the ethics of maturity, the ethics of a creator, the ethics of someone who refuses to live a life passed down to them. Nietzsche knew this wouldn't be easy. He understood the psychological grip of religious morality. It offers comfort, safety, ready-made answers. The path of the Superman, on the other hand, offers freedom and risk. There are no guarantees, no external salvation. There's only you, your life, your courage, your loyalty to existence. And that's exactly what makes this life so valuable. The Superman lives in such a way that he doesn't need an afterlife to justify his existence. He finds meaning in the sheer intensity of living. He turns pain into strength, chaos into creation, emptiness into possibility. He loves life, even when it hurts, even when it doesn't make sense. That's why he's more than just a man. He's someone who has already gone beyond being human. Nietzsche once said, "I teach you the Superman. Man is something to be overcome." And for that to happen, we must break the chains of religious morality. Not with hate, but with clarity. Not with revenge, but with freedom. Because true respect for life only becomes possible when we stop condemning it in the name of some imaginary beyond. Overcoming religious morality is ultimately an act of love for existence. It's a return to the body, to desire, to the present moment. It's the end of guilt as the foundation of ethics. It's the affirmation of life in all its complexity, in its pain, its beauty, its glory. And that demands a new kind of spirituality, one without denial, a spirituality without resentment, a spirituality rooted in the earth. Nietzsche doesn't want to destroy the sacred. He wants to redefine it. For him, the sacred lies in the power to create, the courage to live, the greatness of being true to yourself. It's in the dance of the moment, the brilliance of the now, the creation of values that are born not from fear, but from strength. That's why the Superman is a symbol of rebirth. He doesn't reject tradition out of pride, but because he knows you can only bloom fully once you rip out the roots that are choking you. He represents a new era, not the era of blind faith, but of awakened consciousness, not the age of sin, but of possibility. He is the one who doesn't kneel to the sky, but rises on the earth and honors it with the full force of his existence. Imagine that one day, in a quiet moment of your life, maybe while walking, maybe alone in your room, a deep voice whispered to you, "This life you live, with all its pain, joy, doubts, and victories, will have to be lived again. Not just once, but forever. Every moment, every choice, every tear, every laugh, all of it will repeat, endlessly. Would you want that?" That's the powerful and unsettling image Friedrich Nietzsche presents in his idea of the eternal return. It's not a cosmological theory. It's not about time looping or reincarnation. It's a radical philosophical experiment, an existential challenge. Nietzsche confronts us with the hardest question of all. Are you living in a way that you'd want to live again? Forever? This idea appears most vividly in his book, The Gay Science, in aphorism 341, called The Heaviest Burden. Nietzsche writes, "What if a demon were to sneak up to you one night in your loneliest solitude and say, 'This life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more, and countless times more. And there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh and everything unutterably small or great in your life must return to you, all in the same sequence and order.' The weight of this thought is immense. It offers no comfort, no salvation. On the contrary, it demands total responsibility. If everything repeats, then every choice matters endlessly. Every moment stops being temporary and becomes eternal. Living poorly is no longer just a mistake. It becomes an eternal curse. For Nietzsche, this thought is the ultimate test of life affirmation. He once said, "My formula for greatness is amor fati, love of fate. Eternal return is the final proof of that love. Only those who deeply love life could wish to live it again, exactly as it is, with no edits, no erasures. It's the challenge of embracing life in its fullness, with all its tragedy, confusion, and unpredictability, and still saying, 'Yes, I would live this all again.' And that's where the Superman comes in. The Übermensch is the one who passes the test of eternal return. He lives in such a way that he wouldn't erase a single moment, because each one was lived with intensity, truth, and loyalty to himself. He doesn't feel regret because he doesn't live by guilt. He doesn't long to start over because he doesn't wait for a future paradise. He affirms the present with all its flaws as something worthy of eternity. This is a huge demand. We live in a culture of regret, of waiting, of postponement. How many times have you thought, "If only I could go back"? How many times have you wished things had turned out differently? Nietzsche offers a different path. Don't run from the past. Live in a way that you wouldn't need to. Build a life that, if repeated forever, would still be worth living. So the eternal return isn't about time, it's about ethics, it's about intensity. It's a call to become more aware of every choice, more responsible for every action, more committed to every moment, because there won't be another. But living this way takes courage. Courage to stop numbing yourself. Courage to stop waiting for life to begin tomorrow. Courage to stop needing future rewards to justify the present. The Superman is the one who lives so fully that even the hard moments have dignity. He turns pain into learning, mistakes into creation, failure into movement. Nietzsche knew this ideal would be too much for most people. Eternal return is not comforting. It's a challenge for the strong, for those who don't just want to survive, but to live intensely, for those who don't run from life, but face it head on. That's why eternal return can also be used as a personal test. Ask yourself before making a decision, if I had to repeat this action forever, would I still choose it? If the answer is yes, then you're acting in alignment with your true self. If the answer is no, maybe you're living to please others, meet expectations, or avoid conflict, instead of living as who you really are. Nietzsche, at this point, is brutally honest. He's not trying to protect us from life. He wants to strengthen us to embrace it, contradictions and all. The Superman is the one who doesn't want to erase anything because he knows that everything, even what hurt, is part of life's dance. He doesn't chase shallow happiness. He embraces tragic greatness. And there's something deeply freeing in this idea because it snaps us out of waiting. It forces us to look at the now. Nietzsche wants us to wake up, to stop putting off life for the sake of empty promises or false hopes. He wants us to be the authors of our destiny, not just spectators. That's why the eternal return isn't a curse. It's a call to greatness. It's an invitation to live with such authenticity that nothing would need to be changed. Not because life is perfect, but because it was lived with radical honesty. It means turning chaos into creation, and each moment into eternity. Nietzsche knew, few are ready for this level of affirmation. Most want guarantees. They want a second chance. They want to escape responsibility. But the Superman doesn't want guarantees. He wants to live so truly, so fully, so faithfully, that he could live his life over and over without ever being ashamed of it. And you? Are you living like someone who would smile at the demon of eternal return? Or like someone who would beg him not to be telling the truth? That's the question Nietzsche leaves us with. And it doesn't require a clever answer. It demands a new way of living. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Friedrich Nietzsche presents one of the most poetic and symbolic images in all his philosophy: the three metamorphoses of the spirit, the camel, the lion, and the child. Each of these represents a stage in the inner transformation a person must go through to break free, overcome themselves, and become a creator of values. This journey isn't just philosophical, it's deeply personal and existential. Nietzsche isn't talking about abstract theory here. He's talking about life lived intensely. He describes the painful but freeing path of self-overcoming, a path that begins with submission, moves through rebellion, and ends in creation. Let's dive into that process. First metamorphosis, the camel. The camel is the first stage of the spirit. It represents the person who carries heavy burdens, who kneels down, who takes on the weight of imposed values. The camel is strong, but that strength is used to endure, to obey, to carry what others have placed on its back. Nietzsche describes this stage as the time when the spirit says yes to duty, to tradition, to inherited morality. The camel accepts everything without questioning. It says, yes, I'll carry. Yes, I'll obey. Yes, I'll give up. People admire it for its humility, discipline, and dedication. But Nietzsche warns us that strength, proud of its obedience, is not true freedom. It's the strength of a still submissive spirit. How many of us live like camels, carrying the weight of social, family, or religious expectations, following rules, beliefs, and standards, not because we chose them, but because we inherited them? The camel represents the stage where we still live by other people's values, even if those values suffocate us. But eventually, the camel walks into the desert. And it's in this symbolic desert, a place of solitude, doubt, and crisis, that the second metamorphosis can begin. Second metamorphosis, the lion. In the desert, the camel becomes a lion. The lion is the spirit that has learned to say no, It rebels. It roars against everything it once carried with submission. It says, enough. The lion represents the stage of breaking free, of consciously rejecting imposed values. Nietzsche says the lion fights the great dragon, the golden dragon whose scales all read thou shalt. This dragon stands for traditional morality, for all the sacred commandments demanding obedience. Each scale carries a sacred rule: thou shalt love, thou shalt forgive, thou shalt obey. The lion won't accept this anymore. The lion says, I will. This is the phase of emancipation, of cutting ties, of destroying the old. But Nietzsche also warns, the lion can only destroy. It still can't create. It has the power to say no, but not yet the ability to say a creative yes. The lion has broken away from others' morals, but it hasn't yet found its own. This is a crucial and dangerous stage. Many people stop here. They rebel, but don't move beyond. They reject everything, but don't build anything. Nietzsche knew that saying no isn't enough. Life demands more. Life demands creation. And to create, another transformation is needed. Third metamorphosis, the child. Then the lion becomes a child. The third and final metamorphosis of the spirit. The child represents the free and creative spirit, who has overcome both submission and rebellion. The child doesn't carry burdens anymore. It doesn't need to roar. It plays, it creates, it says yes to life with lightness and spontaneity. Nietzsche writes, the child is innocence and forgetting, a new beginning, a game, a wheel rolling by itself, a first movement, a sacred yes. The child is a symbol of rebirth, of starting fresh, but it's not a return to literal childhood. It's a spiritual state of creation. It represents someone who has already let go of resentment, who is broken free from the weight of the world and is now ready to live with authenticity, creating their own values. The child doesn't obey like the camel. It doesn't reject like the lion. It creates because it trusts itself. It lives in the now. It turns life into play, not in a shallow way, but in a free and creative way. For Nietzsche, true maturity is about reclaiming innocence. To be mature is to go through the pain of rejection and still have the strength to create meaning. The spirit of the child is the spirit of the Übermensch, the creator of new values. Someone who lives without the weight of tradition, without the poison of resentment, and without the anxiety of trying to justify their life with someone else's rules. They turn life into art, alive, organic, unique. And this journey, from camel to lion, from lion to child, is Nietzsche's map for self-overcoming. It's not a straight path, and it's not easy. Often, we fall back into being the camel or return to roaring like the lion. But the goal is always to move forward. Less blind obedience, less pointless rebellion, more true creation. Nietzsche doesn't give us a step-by-step manual. He gives us living, symbolic images so we can reflect and recognize ourselves. Ask yourself, what burdens am I still carrying? Which commands do I still kneel to follow? What do I still need to roar against? And the hardest question, what part of me is already free enough to play with life? The three metamorphoses are demanding, because they're not about changing your behavior, but about transforming your inner being. They invite you to a deep, often painful, but always freeing process. Nietzsche knew that few would have the courage to go through it. Most people choose to remain camels, some become lions, very few become children. But it's in those few that life finds its most powerful expression. In On the Genealogy of Morality, Nietzsche asks a question that people rarely consider. Where do our moral values actually come from? Why do we call certain actions good and others evil? Who decided that, and with what purpose? Nietzsche realized that behind what we think of as ethical or virtuous, there are deep historical, psychological, and social forces at play. He set out to uncover the roots of Western morality. And what he found was shocking. Our most sacred values were born from resentment. This is the foundation of his distinction between two fundamental kinds of morality: master morality and slave morality. This distinction isn't about literal social classes, but rather two different mindsets, two ways of looking at life and assigning value. It's a philosophical clash between affirming life and resenting it. Master morality is the morality of the strong, of those who live from their own sense of meaning. For them, what is good isn't about following rules imposed from the outside. It's about what expresses strength, vitality, freedom, and creativity. The master values life in its fullness, its pleasures, risks, pain, and triumphs. He doesn't need commandments to justify his existence. He creates values from within, based on his inner strength. To the master, good is whatever makes him stronger. Courage, pride, genuine generosity, the ability to lead, to create, and to transform. These aren't good because someone said so. They are good because they arise from abundance, not from lack. The master doesn't envy others. He's whole in himself. He doesn't hate what he isn't. He simply lives what he is. His morality isn't based on comparison, but on expression. He says yes to life. He doesn't need to tear others down to feel worthy. His nobility is that he doesn't reduce himself to the herd. Nietzsche saw this kind of morality in the ancient Greek aristocrats, in Roman nobility, and even in tragic figures in art. People who, even in suffering, didn't shrink but absorbed it as part of life's greatness. Slave morality, on the other hand, is reactive. It doesn't create values from within, but instead defines itself against what others are. The slave doesn't say, "This is good because it empowers me." He says, "That is evil because it belongs to the master." He denies what the other affirms. And from this denial, he forms his idea of good. The weak start to call good whatever is harmless, whatever isn't a threat. Nietzsche says this morality is born from resentment, a deep frustration that can't be expressed directly and turns toxic. The slave can't confront the master. He has no way to defeat him, surpass him, or compete with him. So what does he do? He flips the values. The master's strength becomes violence. His joy becomes vanity. His freedom becomes rebellion. His pride becomes sin. Submission, once humiliating, is turned into a virtue. Obedience, once a sign of weakness, is celebrated. And thus, a morality is born that denies life, denies instinct, denies the body, and glorifies suffering, poverty, guilt, and self-denial. Nietzsche saw Judeo-Christian morality as a clear example of this inversion. He wasn't attacking faith itself, but the kind of morality that grew out of the resentment of the weak against the strong. A system that taught people to admire weakness and fear greatness, to praise sacrifice and condemn joy, to spiritualize pain and criminalize pleasure. To Nietzsche, slave morality won in Western culture. It seeped into everything: religion, education, politics, even our private lives. It created a humanity that's afraid, resentful, moralistic, and ashamed. A humanity afraid to live fully, and quick to judge anyone who dares to stand tall and be authentic. This kind of morality teaches that life should be tolerated, not celebrated. That we should deny our instincts. That desire is dangerous. That strength is immoral. And worst of all, it convinces us that all of this is a virtue. Nietzsche asks, is this really morality? Or just the revenge of the weak dressed up as holiness? The Übermensch, the overman or superman, is the one who breaks away from this sick morality. He doesn't just reject slave morality, he transcends it by creating a whole new way of valuing. He doesn't react, he creates. He doesn't hate, he affirms. He doesn't play the victim, he takes full responsibility for himself. The Übermensch lives with nobility, but not nobility of birth or status. It's a nobility of spirit, the greatness of someone who doesn't need to put others down to feel complete. He doesn't act from moral obligation, but out of loyalty to his own inner power. He's generous, not because he wants approval, but because his strength overflows. He is free, and because of that, he doesn't wish to see others as slaves. Nietzsche isn't saying that everyone should become a master in the traditional sense. He's calling us to free ourselves from reactive morality, to stop living as slaves to the past, to guilt, to other people's judgment, to live according to our own inner strength, our uniqueness, our will to create. At its core, the clash between master and slave morality is about two very different relationships with life itself. Slave morality denies life. It fears the body, desire, and freedom. Master morality affirms life. It accepts the tragic, the instinctive, the chaotic, and transforms it into strength. Nietzsche wants us to choose life, with all its difficulty, unpredictability, and pain. He wants us to stop hiding behind dogmas and start taking radical responsibility for creating our own meaning, because only then can we truly live with greatness. For Nietzsche, true morality doesn't come from fear, it comes from strength, not from obedience, but from creation, not from denial, but from affirmation. That's the shift he calls for, and it demands courage, clarity, and above all, a deep loyalty to your own life. Among all of Friedrich Nietzsche's works, none is as mysterious, poetic, and revolutionary as Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Published between 1883 and 1885, the book introduces a character who's not just a narrator, but a living symbol of Nietzsche's entire philosophy. Zarathustra, the prophet of the beyond man, the herald of the Übermensch, the messenger calling for the end of humanity's decaying values. But who is this Zarathustra? And why did Nietzsche choose him to voice his boldest ideas? Historically, Zarathustra, also known as Zoroaster, was a Persian prophet who lived centuries before Christ and founded Zoroastrianism. He was a spiritual reformer who introduced ideas like the battle between good and evil, dualistic morality, and the final judgment. And that's exactly why Nietzsche chose him. Because who better to announce the death of morality than the one who, according to history, created it? Nietzsche flips Zarathustra's role. Instead of being a prophet who divides the world into good and evil, he becomes a messenger who rises above that duality. This Zarathustra doesn't preach salvation or final judgment. He declares that God is dead and that humanity must be overcome. He doesn't offer rewards in the afterlife. He challenges people to find meaning here and now. Right at the start of the book, Zarathustra comes down from the mountains after years of solitude. He has seen the world from above and now returns to share his vision. His first major message is sharp and unforgettable. Man is something that shall be overcome. That line is the foundation of the Übermensch concept. For Nietzsche, the human being as we know it is just a bridge, a transition between the animal and what we might become. The Übermensch isn't some superior biological being or moral dictator. He's a symbol of someone who breaks free from inherited values, who lives by his own self-created ethics, who fully affirms life. Zarathustra isn't just a preacher, he's a tragic spirit. His path is marked by loneliness, rejection, failure, and silence. He comes down to share a new vision, but no one understands him. His words are twisted, his message mocked, and he retreats again into solitude. Through Zarathustra, Nietzsche shows us that true spiritual revolutionaries are always out of place in their own time. But this rejection doesn't stop him, it only strengthens his purpose. Zarathustra realizes that spiritual transformation is a deeply personal journey, and that few are truly ready to face the truth. He speaks to those who can feel it, those who are tired of going in circles, drained by shallow morality, longing for a more authentic life. To them, he says, "Become who you are." Zarathustra is also the voice behind the three transformations of the spirit: the camel, the lion, and the child. He doesn't just teach this, he lives it. First, he becomes the camel, carrying the weight of the world. Then the lion, rebelling against everything. And finally, the child, the creator of new values. Nietzsche doesn't speak from the outside, he writes from within Zarathustra. The character is a living extension of Nietzsche's own inner struggle. Unlike traditional religious figures, Zarathustra doesn't hand out absolute truths. He doesn't ask for blind faith, he invites reflection. He says, "Thus spoke Zarathustra," not "this is the truth." It's an invitation, not a command. He doesn't want followers, he wants people who create themselves. That's why he doesn't start a church or preach a doctrine. He plants questions, he provokes, he shakes people awake. And that's pure Nietzsche, a call for spiritual independence, personal creation, and refusal of dogma. Zarathustra reminds us that no one can live our life for us, that ready-made values are dangerous, that living well means constantly remaking yourself. His message isn't moralistic, it's existential. He speaks to the freedom we each carry inside, the freedom most people are afraid to face. The prophet of the beyond man doesn't reject life like the worn-out religious figures do. On the contrary, he loves life deeply. He doesn't run from suffering, he embraces it. He doesn't wait for future salvation. He builds greatness in the present. He lives by the idea of eternal return, in a way that he'd want to live every single moment again and again, forever, with no regrets. And that's his strength. Zarathustra is whole. He doesn't split life into good and evil, body and soul, heaven and earth. He lives it all with intensity and acceptance. His spirituality is rooted in the earth. His ethics come from creation. His path is solitude, but a fertile solitude, one that gives birth to meaning and power. Nietzsche said that Thus Spoke Zarathustra was his most personal book. Near the end of his life, he even said that no prophet is worthy of brushing its dust. And that makes sense, because Zarathustra isn't just a character Nietzsche made up. He is Nietzsche's own voice, taken to the edge of poetry and symbolism. He is the living expression of a philosophy that refuses half-truths, that never chooses comfort, that demands full intensity. Zarathustra represents the human being in transformation, not someone who has arrived, but someone who is constantly becoming, who refuses to settle for fixed beliefs, who breaks from what was and dares to reach for what could be. He's the symbol of our highest human potential, to overcome ourselves and become the true authors of our own lives. That's why Zarathustra isn't a leader or a savior. He's a mirror for those who feel deep down that living halfway isn't enough, for those who know, even if they've never said it out loud, that there's a greater version of themselves within, still sleeping, still silent, but ready to wake up. Among Nietzsche's most powerful ideas, one stands out for its quiet depth and revolutionary tone. Amor fati, Latin for love of fate. But don't get it twisted. Nietzsche isn't asking us to passively accept life. He's not promoting resignation, submission, or playing the victim. What he proposes with Amor fati is something much harder, and at the same time, much greater. To embrace life exactly as it is, with everything it brings, the beautiful and the ugly, the pleasure and the pain, the chaos and the order, without regret, without denial, and without trying to idealize it. Nietzsche writes in Ecce Homo, "My formula for human greatness is amor fati, not wanting anything to be different, not in the past, not in the future, not for all eternity, not just bearing what's necessary, still less hiding it, but loving it." This idea is at the heart of his thinking and is deeply connected to his other core concepts, like the eternal return and the Übermensch, Superman. Because accepting your fate, not as a trap, but as a field for affirmation, is one of the highest signs of inner strength. Nietzsche isn't saying everything that happens is good. Pain, mistakes, loss, all of it is still hard, often unfair, sometimes impossible to explain. But he challenges us not to reject these experiences, but to turn them into fuel for growth. Amor fati is the ability to look back, even at what hurt you, and say, yes, that happened. And even so, I embrace life. This mindset takes more than courage. It takes deep inner maturity. Because it's easy to love life when things are going well. It's hard to keep that love when everything falls apart, when plans fail, when dreams don't come true. Most people live with a constant sense of regret and fantasy. If only I had done things differently. If I had chosen another path. If I had said no. Nietzsche rejects that way of thinking. To him, living with regret is denying the life you actually lived. And for Nietzsche, that denial is the ultimate sin. He doesn't want you to erase the past. He wants you to integrate it. Even the parts that hurt. Even the parts that broke you. Because only then can you become whole. This radical acceptance isn't weakness. It's creative power. Loving your fate doesn't mean loving suffering in itself. It means loving the strength that comes out of it, or better yet, through it. Nietzsche doesn't romanticize pain, but he knows real growth begins when we stop running from it. That brings us closer to the ideal of the Übermensch, the one who lives so fully, so truthfully, that he doesn't wish to change anything, not even his mistakes. The Superman isn't chasing redemption. He's creating something new. He lives with such intensity and loyalty to himself that nothing in his past needs to be denied. Even the failures are embraced. Even the falls become part of his greatness. Nietzsche is telling us something deep. You can only love life completely when you accept the tragic. And the tragic isn't just about pain. It's about the fact that life is unstable, unpredictable, imperfect. What he challenges isn't the desire to grow. It's the constant urge to reject what was. The need to escape reality, to wait for a better later, to live only for some ideal future. Amor fati is the end of that escape. It's the beginning of a life where you say yes, even to what once made no sense. It's turning, "Why did this happen to me?" into, "How can I grow from this?" It's looking back without regret and forward without anxiety. It's living in the present with depth and trust. This idea goes against almost everything modern culture teaches us. We live in a world built on fake optimism. Phrases like, "everything will get better," "stay positive," or "just believe," are thrown around like mantras. But deep down, they're ways to avoid reality. Nietzsche gives us the opposite, a philosophy of raw awareness and powerful acceptance. To love fate is to love what's real, not what's ideal. And here's the most transformative part. Amor fati sets you free. When you stop wishing things were different and start accepting life as it is, something breaks inside you, and something is freed. Guilt dissolves, resentment fades, illusion disappears. And then, for the first time, you begin to live with more presence, more surrender, more authenticity. Nietzsche doesn't promise a painless life. He promises a meaningful one, despite the pain. Because meaning doesn't come from avoiding the blows of fate. It comes from using each one to build yourself. The true creator is the one who turns suffering into art. Amor fati is also a form of humility. It means recognizing we don't control everything in life, but we do control how we respond to it. And Nietzsche's answer is clear. Respond with creative acceptance, with love for what is, with the courage to embrace everything you've lived and everything still to come, as part of your unique path. Nietzsche knew this wouldn't be easy. Loving your fate might be the hardest ethical challenge he offers, but it's also his most beautiful promise. A life that doesn't need to be corrected, explained, or justified, because it's lived fully. Amor fati is the art of looking at your own story, with all its scars, and saying, "It was hard, but it was mine, and I wouldn't trade it for anything." The Superman isn't some perfect figure you're supposed to copy. He's a living metaphor for continuous growth and the creation of your own values. Nietzsche never gave us a clear portrait of the Übermensch as if he were a real person, a historical figure, or a fixed ideal. In fact, he insisted that the Superman isn't a finished product. He's an open possibility, something that points beyond the current human condition. He's a poetic, symbolic, and philosophical image of someone who has overcome inherited values, affirms life without clinging to dogmas, and has stayed true to their own uniqueness. The Superman is not a measurable goal. He's a guiding ideal. You can't institutionalize him, categorize him, or identify him in any objective human type. Nietzsche doesn't give us a step-by-step map to become the Superman. He gives us a vision, a light on the horizon that serves as a compass for self-overcoming. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where the idea of the Übermensch is most developed, Nietzsche writes, "Man is a rope stretched between the animal and the overman, a rope over an abyss." That metaphor says a lot. Humanity is not a finished project, but a transition. The Superman stands on the other side, beyond the tamed, resentful human being who obeys decaying values. But this isn't some magical creature or result of biological evolution. It's a higher way of being, a bold stance toward life. Sadly, over time, this concept has been misunderstood and even twisted for terrible purposes. Authoritarian regimes in the 20th century, for example, distorted the idea of the Übermensch into a symbol of racial superiority or eugenics. That's the exact opposite of what Nietzsche intended. He never talked about a superior race, an ideal type, or biological dominance. His fight was philosophical and existential, not racial, nationalistic, or scientific. Nietzsche despised any form of worshipping sameness. The Superman, in his view, doesn't belong to a race, nation, or culture, but to individuals who can break free from the herd, abandon the mainstream, and think and live for themselves. He's a figure of the future, someone born from creative chaos, ethical courage, and a direct confrontation with nihilism. Treating the Übermensch like a literal being actually weakens the power of the idea. The beauty of this concept lies in its poetic, open-ended, and provocative nature. It doesn't tell us what to be. It pushes us to ask the real question: what are you still capable of becoming? The Superman is like an arrow shot beyond the average human being. He's not defined by physical strength, IQ scores, or natural talent. He's defined by the ability to create his own values, to fully affirm life, to live without needing absolute guarantees. He's the one who lives by amor fati, who passes the test of eternal return, who transforms pain into strength and chaos into creation. Nietzsche never intended to give us a model to imitate. That would go completely against his philosophy. He didn't want followers. He wanted creators. That's why the Superman is a call to invention, not imitation. And that also means there's no single version of the Superman. Each of us, walking our own path of self-overcoming, can express this ideal in a unique way. There's no mold to fill. There's only the demand to be true to yourself, to have the courage to leave behind the comfort of inherited values and live boldly, creatively, and authentically. This metaphor plays a central role in Nietzsche's thought. It pulls us out of the static present and throws us into a future task. The task of surpassing the human we are, with all our fears, habits, dependencies, and lies. And this doesn't happen through institutions or mass movements. The journey of the Superman is personal, internal, and deeply transformative. Nietzsche knew that most people would reject this call. It's much easier to follow rules, repeat what others say, and feel safe inside ready-made systems. But he believed that a few, maybe just a rare few, would feel a deeper impulse, a restlessness, a longing to become more than what they were trained to be. Those people, he believed, are the ones who can embody the spirit of the Übermensch in their own way. And here's the key point. The Superman isn't a destination. He's a direction. He's not out there. He's inside each of us as a sleeping possibility, a force that awakens when we dare to break free from everything that keeps us small, submissive, and guilty. Nietzsche wrote, "The value of a man is determined by how much truth he can bear." The Superman is the one who doesn't need lies to live. He doesn't run from tragedy. He doesn't hide behind divine promises or unreachable ideals. He faces reality with courage. And more than that, he turns it into art, into thought, into pure life force. That's why he's a metaphor, because he represents something beyond what is visible, measurable, or socially acceptable. He's not what you see, he's what you sense. He doesn't define himself, he becomes. Nietzsche didn't want to create a new dogma with the Superman. He wanted to destroy all dogmas. He didn't want to replace one religion with another. He wanted to free the human spirit from fear and guilt. And for that, he needed to create a poetic, powerful, and symbolic image. One capable of shaking people out of their comfort. The Superman, as an ideal of overcoming and value creation. So never go looking for him outside yourself. Don't ask who he is. Ask where, within you, he's still waiting to be born. For Friedrich Nietzsche, art isn't just decoration for life, it's salvation. More than aesthetics or entertainment, art is, in his philosophy, the most powerful expression of the will to power. The vital force that drives everything that lives. And more than that, the artist, according to Nietzsche, is not just someone who paints, sculpts, or composes, but the model of an affirming spirit, someone who turns chaos into form, pain into beauty, suffering into creation. In The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche writes, "It is only as an aesthetic phenomenon that existence and the world are eternally justified." That might sound strange at first, but this sentence captures one of the deepest ideas in Nietzsche's thought. Life, in all its tragedy, only becomes bearable and even valuable when it's seen as a work of art. But to understand that, we need to return to a key concept, the will to power, Wille zur Macht. For Nietzsche, this is the real engine of existence, not just a will to survive, like in Schopenhauer, but a will to expand, to assert, to constantly surpass oneself. Everything that lives, lives to grow, to transform, to express itself. And art is one of the highest manifestations of that force. In this sense, the artist isn't just someone who makes art. The true artist is someone who lives as a creator, someone who refuses to accept the world as it is, and instead imposes form on chaos, who creates meaning where there was only raw sensation. And this doesn't apply only to conventional artists. It applies to anyone bold enough to turn their own life into a work, an original, unique, incomparable work. For Nietzsche, to create is to affirm life, especially when life is hard, unfair, or chaotic. Art doesn't erase suffering, but it transforms suffering into something that can be felt deeply, understood, even admired. The artist doesn't deny the tragic, they embrace it. They look chaos in the eye and say, "I will turn you into beauty." That's real strength. The Nietzschean artist doesn't run from life. They face it, embrace it, and reshape it on another level, the level of creation. That's why, for Nietzsche, the artist is a model for the higher human being. The artist becomes a master of themselves. They don't need outside morals to act. They don't ask for permission to exist. They create values instead of following the ones handed to them. This kind of artist isn't just about technique, it's existential. They don't create just because they know how. They create because they have to, because something deep inside them needs to be expressed, because there's a burning urge to make the invisible visible, to give shape to what can't be said, to make life something worth living and worth reliving forever. This connection between art and affirmation becomes even clearer when we look at Nietzsche's view of Greek tragedy. In The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche examines the works of Aeschylus and Sophocles, and he realizes something powerful. The Greeks didn't use art to escape the pain of life. They used it to face it. Tragedy wasn't comfort, it was confrontation, and that gave it deep spiritual power. Nietzsche believed that tragedy expressed a balance between two forces, the Apollonian, order, form, clarity, and the Dionysian, chaos, ecstasy, instinct. Art is born from the weaving of these two. The artist brings form to chaos without erasing it. They organize instinct without killing it. They celebrate life without sugarcoating it. And that is the mark of aesthetic and spiritual maturity. So, what does this have to do with the Übermensch, the Superman, everything. The Superman is the artist of his own existence. He doesn't live by scripts, dogmas, or commandments. He carves his own path, his own style, his own meaning. He doesn't repeat, he invents. He turns his life into a singular, unrepeatable, authentic work. In Exe Homo, Nietzsche writes, "One must make one's life a work of art." And this is more than a metaphor. It's a task, a form of ethics, a way of being. To live like an artist is to reject mediocrity, conformity, and the herd mentality. It's about transforming suffering into depth, emptiness into creativity, and anxiety into intensity. In Nietzsche's vision, then, art is more than a part of culture. It's a stance toward life. And that's why it sits at the heart of the will to power. Because to create is the most powerful way to affirm life. When we create, we don't just survive, we flourish. We leave our mark on chaos. We say, life was worth it because I transformed it. And that transformation can happen in many ways. A writer who reinvents language, a painter who builds a whole new world on canvas, a philosopher who breaks away from dominant ideas, or even a regular person who chooses to live with radical honesty to their true self, even if no one understands them. All of them are artists, in the Nietzschean sense. That's why Nietzsche believed that a culture should be measured by the strength of its art. Not by its morals, not by its politics, not by its religion, but by its ability to create beauty even in the face of tragedy. For him, cultural decline happens when art loses its power to affirm and becomes just propaganda, escapism, or empty decoration. Great art and great artists are signs that life still pulses with creative power, that it's still possible to resist nihilism, apathy, and decay, that we can still live, not like machines, but like sparks. And maybe that's Nietzsche's most vital message through art. You're not here to obey, you're here to create. Create your own ethics, create your own values, shape your life as an act of affirmation, as an aesthetic act, as a work of art that, if you had to live it over and over for eternity, would still be worth it. Friedrich Nietzsche didn't write to please. He wrote to wake people up. And sometimes, waking up means being shocked. One of his most controversial, and also most important to critiques, is his opposition to what he called modern egalitarianism, a growing trend in Western culture that, under the mask of justice and compassion, promotes mediocrity, erases individuality, and suppresses greatness. But let's be clear, Nietzsche wasn't against equal civil rights, nor was he a supporter of bloodline privilege or social oppression. His critique goes much deeper. He's not talking about politics in the shallow sense. He's talking about values. He's pointing to a cultural illness. How, in the name of protecting the weak, modern society has started glorifying weakness as a virtue and treating excellence as a threat. In his works, especially The Genealogy of Morals and Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche attacks what he calls herd morality, one of the most destructive forces against the human spirit. This morality isn't driven by a pursuit of truth or beauty. It's driven by resentment. A quiet, festering resentment from those who feel small in the presence of those who shine, and who then flip the values. The strong are seen as arrogant, the creative as dangerous, the authentic as selfish. Modern egalitarianism, in this sense, isn't just about fair opportunities. It's the attempt to drag everyone down to the same level, to erase differences, to reduce the exceptional to the average. Nietzsche saw this as a leveling force, one that turns life into a flat, grey plane where no one is allowed to stand out without being punished, where being different makes you guilty, where daring to be more is treated as an offence to the group. He writes in Beyond Good and Evil, "Equality is a lie told by the weak, whispered softly." Harsh as it sounds, this quote sums up his view. For Nietzsche, imposed equality, the kind that denies difference in the name of justice, isn't noble. It's disguised revenge, a way to punish those who dare to be unique, powerful, life-affirming. To Nietzsche, modernity is deeply poisoned by this herd spirit. Institutions, whether religious, political, or educational, are set up to produce obedient, standardized, predictable citizens. Everyone must think the same, feel the same, react the same. Dissent is treated like heresy. Freedom becomes just a facade. And true strength, the kind that challenges, breaks norms, and creates, is pushed to the margins. That's the backdrop for Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch, the Superman. He's the one who refuses to bow to the leveling spirit. He doesn't live to be accepted. He has the courage to think and live outside the herd. The Superman isn't superior because of natural gifts or outside privilege. He's superior because he had the guts to become who he truly is, even if it isolates him, even if no one understands, even if it costs him everything. Egalitarian morality, which is built on fear of difference, punishes excellence. From a young age, we're taught that it's wrong to want to be more, that standing out is arrogant, that we should all be humble, submissive, average. But Nietzsche saw this as poison, the poison of self-imposed mediocrity, of giving up personal strength, of cowardice disguised as virtue. He said, mediocrity is humanity's real danger, because for him, it's not evil or mistakes or conflict that threaten life. It's stagnation, conformity, and the lack of greatness. A society where no one rises, no one creates, no one risks, is a dead society, even if it runs smoothly. Nietzsche isn't celebrating social inequality or abuse of power. What he's saying is even more provocative. Human beings are not equal, and they shouldn't be treated as if they are, not in a legal sense, but in a spiritual one. Each person carries a unique potential, an unrepeatable individuality. And what he fights against is the trend of crushing that uniqueness in the name of some abstract ideal of equality. True respect, according to Nietzsche, doesn't mean making everyone the same. It means recognizing greatness when it shows up. It means letting the strong be strong, letting the creator create, letting the free remain free. And if the weak want to grow stronger, let them, but without holding back those who are already blooming. In that sense, Nietzsche's philosophy is demanding. It doesn't offer comfort. It challenges us. Are you living according to your full potential, or just trying to fit in? Are you creating your own values, or just repeating what the crowd believes? Do you have the courage to be truly yourself, or are you hiding behind the safety of being average? Nietzsche believed the future of humanity would depend on how we answer those questions. And he feared that under modern egalitarianism, we were raising crowds without soul, citizens without autonomy, people who live but never flourish. His solution? Self-overcoming. A return to life as creation, as art, as an act of individual affirmation. It's not about dominating others. It's about mastering yourself, living with courage, authenticity, and intensity. Breaking free from herd morality and becoming the author of your own life. Nietzsche didn't reject empathy, solidarity, or community. What he rejected was forced sameness. He wanted a society where difference is celebrated, not crushed, where individual freedom matters more than collective approval, where each person has the right to become who they are, without needing anyone's permission. In a world that constantly tries to flatten us, Nietzsche reminds us that real ethics is about rising, that the greatest service someone can give to humanity is not to be like everyone else, but to become fully themselves, and in doing so, inspire others to rise too. The courage to be a creator of values. This may be one of the hardest, loneliest, and most transformative challenges Nietzsche places on the human being. In his philosophy, this mission is given to the Übermensch, the Superman, not someone who rules over others, but someone who creates new values for themselves, even in the face of misunderstanding, rejection, and silence from the world. We live surrounded by ready-made values, ideas of what's right and wrong, noble or shameful, just or sinful. Most of these were taught to us long before we had the chance to question them. Passed down through tradition, religion, the state, and culture, they shape our actions as if they were natural truths. But Nietzsche invites us to ask a disturbing question. Who said these values still matter? In his work on the genealogy of morality, Nietzsche shows that many of the West's most respected values didn't come from strength. They came from resentment. They were created by weak spirits, unable to affirm their own will, who sought revenge by flipping moral standards. They called good what was meek, submissive, and obedient, and labeled evil what was strong, instinctive, and authentic. That's how slave morality was born. A morality that denies life. So what do we do with that? Nietzsche's answer: overcome that morality, revalue all values. But this doesn't mean falling into passive nihilism, where nothing matters and everything is relative. On the contrary, it means having the courage to create meaning from within, to live as a legislator, someone who, instead of obeying, creates their own ethical compass. This is the gesture of the Übermensch. He is not a lawmaker for others, but a lawmaker for himself. He doesn't look for external validation. He doesn't need sacred commandments or the approval of the crowd. He acts with deep loyalty to his own uniqueness. And that loyalty demands courage. Because creating your own values means going against the grain. It means questioning accepted norms, breaking with traditions that others hold sacred, living so authentically that most people won't understand and will criticize, reject, or even fear you because of it. Nietzsche knew this. He lived on the fringes of his time. He was mocked, isolated, misunderstood. But it was from that place that he wrote with authority. To create new values, you must endure the loneliness that comes with it. The world isn't ready for people who master themselves. Most prefer the obedient, the predictable, the ones who follow the rulebook. But the creator of values doesn't follow rulebooks. He writes his own, and he does it not out of arrogance, but with clarity and moral courage. Nietzsche never romanticizes this figure. He knows the weight the legislator carries, because to create values is to take full responsibility for your life. It's to stop blaming others, or the system, or God, or fate. It's to say, I am the measure, and then live up to that. This act is both ethical and aesthetic. Ethical, because it requires integrity, discipline, and awareness. Aesthetic, because Nietzsche believed that life should be lived like a work of art, and every great piece of art needs form, intention, and style. The value creator is the artist of their own existence. He doesn't try to be perfect, but he strives to be true to himself. Yes, he makes mistakes, but he learns from them. He suffers, but turns pain into strength. He doesn't live to be a role model, but ends up becoming one simply by being authentic. And that authenticity becomes, paradoxically, an inspiration to others who also long to break free. Nietzsche knew that very few would accept this calling, because to become a creator of values means giving up the comfort of obedience. It means living without ready-made truths, without dogmas, without absolutes. It means taking risks, including the risk of being wrong. But for Nietzsche, to live without that freedom isn't really living. It's domesticated survival. The legislator of values, by nature, is a tragic spirit. He knows he will never be fully understood. He knows his values won't be universal. But he persists, because he doesn't create to please. He creates because he must. He lives by the will to power, that deep force that seeks growth, intensity, and affirmation. Nietzsche writes in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "Tell me, my brothers, what matters good and evil? The noblest thing is to create values. That creation is the ultimate act of courage, because there are no guarantees, no solid ground, only the abyss and the demand to walk across it, writing the story of your life with your own blood. The Übermensch is above all a silent legislator. He doesn't impose, he inspires. His life isn't a sermon, It's an example of someone who dared to live by their own principles, even if it meant losing the approval of the world. And maybe that's Nietzsche's greatest lesson. Don't wait for the world to tell you how to live. The world fears the free, but you weren't made to be a copy. You were made to create. The courage to be a creator of values is the courage to be whole, to not trade your soul for comfort, to not betray your truth for acceptance, to live not as an echo, but as a voice. Few words sound as dark and heavy as nihilism. For many people, it brings to mind despair, emptiness, loss of meaning, and lack of direction. And yes, Friedrich Nietzsche was one of the philosophers who explored this abyss more deeply than anyone else. But what he found there wasn't just destruction. It was also possibility. For Nietzsche, nihilism isn't the end. It's the beginning. It's not just a crisis. It's a necessary transition into something new. So, first of all, what exactly is nihilism? In simple terms, nihilism is the loss of faith in ultimate values. It's the experience of realizing that the foundations that used to support life, God, traditional morality, absolute truth, no longer hold up. It's the collapse of the certainties that gave meaning to Western life for centuries. It's the feeling that nothing has real value anymore, nothing is sacred, and nothing is guaranteed. Nietzsche saw this process as inevitable in modern culture, and he announced it with a powerful phrase, "God is dead." But this isn't just a religious statement. Nietzsche wasn't simply saying that people had stopped believing in God. He meant that the absolute values that structured Western morality and culture had collapsed, and that collapse creates a vacuum, a dangerous vacuum, but also a fertile one. This collapse doesn't happen all at once. It creeps into culture slowly. First come the doubts. Then traditions start losing their power to convince. Religion stops guiding. Morality stops inspiring. Science, though powerful, can't give meaning. It only describes. And gradually, everything starts to feel groundless. Nietzsche called this passive nihilism, a state of spiritual exhaustion, where people still follow old values, but no longer truly believe in them. They repeat words like good, justice, or truth, but those words no longer carry any real weight. People live by habit, by fear, by inertia. It's a kind of moral apathy, where someone feels no meaning, but also lacks the strength to create new meaning. This form of nihilism is dangerous because it leads to resignation, conformity, and a lack of will. Nietzsche described this phase as a kind of cultural sickness, a time when people hide behind entertainment, shallow morality, and mechanical work just to avoid facing the emptiness head-on. But Nietzsche didn't stop there. He also spoke about a second kind of nihilism, active nihilism. And this is where his philosophy becomes powerful. Active nihilism is the radical awareness that old values have died, and the refusal to turn away from that truth. It's the moment someone says, yes, everything humanity used to believe in has fallen apart. So now what? I will create something new. This type of nihilism is creative. It's tragic and heroic at the same time, because instead of being crushed by the emptiness, the individual treats it as a blank canvas. They understand that the collapse of old values is also a chance to start from scratch, to build something more authentic, more life-affirming, more real. Nietzsche wrote, "Nihilism is the path to self-overcoming." And that's where the Übermensch, the Superman, comes in. The Superman can only emerge when everything that was once seen as eternal has fallen. He is the one who walks through nihilism, not to fall into despair, but to rise again with new values, values created from within. Crossing through nihilism takes courage, because nihilism destroys our existential safety nets. It takes away the comforting belief that there's a guaranteed purpose, that there's a single, absolute good, that everything has some greater meaning waiting to be revealed. It confronts us with raw, naked, radical freedom. But within that freedom lies the key. Nietzsche didn't want people to stay stuck in nihilism. He wanted them to move through it, to face the dark night of the soul and come out the other side ready to create meaning with their own hands. That, to him, is the greatest power a human being has, to stop living by borrowed values and start living by values born from their own will to affirm life. In existential terms, nihilism is not a phase to be avoided, but a passage to be faced with clarity. It's the emptiness before rebirth. It's the scorched ground where new seeds can finally grow. But be warned that rebirth won't be collective or automatic. It requires a personal, deep, and solitary decision. Nietzsche knew that not everyone would be able to handle this. Many would prefer to run back to old certainties, even if they're hollow. Others would collapse into despair or self-destruction. But a few, just a few, would find the strength to turn nihilism into a source of power. These few are the ones who become creators of themselves, the ones who, in the silence of the world, hear their own voice, the ones who, when faced with the absence of meaning, build their own, the ones who, in the face of collapse, rise up and say, "I don't need a borrowed purpose. I will be the purpose." Nietzsche didn't romanticize nihilism. He knew it was painful, dangerous, and confusing. But he also knew it was necessary, because as long as we stay chained to inherited values, we'll never create anything truly new. Nihilism is the price of freedom, and freedom is the ground for creation. At the core, Nietzsche's message is clear. You can't create something truly yours while living by someone else's values. Nihilism is the moment when those values fall apart. It's hard, it's dark, but it's also the beginning of authenticity. So if you feel the emptiness, don't run from it. If you sense that old meanings no longer hold up, don't panic. Maybe you're standing at the edge of something greater. Maybe the old is dying so that something new, something real, something yours, can finally be born. Friedrich Nietzsche was one of the fiercest critics of absolute truths, not because he wanted to live in ignorance or because he disrespected knowledge, but because he understood that every truth comes from a perspective, and that many of humanity's greatest dangers have come from the blind belief that there is only one possible truth. For Nietzsche, this kind of claim, dogma, is a form of intellectual violence, and to fight it is an act of freedom. In Beyond Good and Evil, he wrote, "Every philosophy is a disguised biography." With this, Nietzsche meant that there's no such thing as pure, neutral, eternal thinking. Every thought is rooted in something. It comes from a person, from a body, from a temperament, from a moment in life. Philosophy, far from being a cold and objective analysis of reality, is an act of creation, an interpretation, a personal affirmation. That doesn't mean everything is relative or that every opinion has the same value. Nietzsche wasn't a shallow relativist. What he proposed was more nuanced. He challenged the idea that there's only one right way to see the world, one eternal truth that exists outside of history or life. For him, truth should be seen as something we build, a tool, not a dogma. That's why Nietzsche despised dogmatic certainty, because it stops thought in its tracks. It pretends knowledge is finished. It shuts down doubt, inquiry, and conflict, all the things life needs to keep moving. Absolute certainty is the death of the question, and without questions, there's no philosophy. Instead, he called for the value of perspective, what he called perspectivism. Every viewpoint, every culture, every body, every person sees the world from a different angle. None of them sees it all. None has access to a God's eye view, a perspective outside of life. What we have are interpretations, some richer, more powerful, more creative, others weaker, more reactive, more dogmatic. Nietzsche wrote, "There are no facts, only interpretations." This phrase is often misunderstood. It doesn't mean the world is fake or an illusion. It means the world we experience is always shaped by our language, our culture, our desires, and our limits. And recognizing that doesn't make thought weaker, it makes it stronger, because it makes us more humble, more alert, more open to others. The dogmatist, on the other hand, believes their view is the only correct one, and all others are wrong. They don't listen, they don't engage, they don't learn. They just repeat what they believe to be the truth. Nietzsche saw this as a sign of spiritual weakness. The dogmatist clings to certainty because they're afraid of uncertainty. They can't handle the complexity of the world, so they hide in closed systems. This criticism applies not just to religion, but also to science, politics, and morality. Nietzsche opposed any kind of thinking that presents itself as absolute and final. To him, both religious moralism and rigid scientific dogma come from the same sickness, a denial of life's diversity. Nietzsche's philosophy invites us to think in a way that's both tragic and plural. Tragic, because it accepts that the world isn't eternally peaceful or perfect, but full of conflict, change, and impermanence. Plural, because it recognizes that no single language or idea can capture everything, and that life's richness comes from its many interpretations. This idea connects deeply with his vision of the Übermensch, the overman, or Superman, someone who doesn't live by imposed truths, but creates their own way of seeing and living in the world. The Übermensch doesn't need dogmas. He lives by his own strength, his desire to interpret, and his ability to turn chaos into meaning. That takes courage. Letting go of certainty means losing the ground beneath your feet. It means walking without a guaranteed map. But Nietzsche believed that real freedom only begins when we stop chasing final truths and start living as interpreters, creators, and explorers of reality. Nietzsche's rejection of dogmatic certainty is, at its core, a deep respect for life as a constant flow. Life isn't static. It's not pure logic. It's not a closed system. Life is instinct, contradiction, intensity, transformation. And the kind of thinking that wants to stay close to life must be flexible, critical, and open. Nietzsche had a deep distrust of philosophers who tried to trap reality in rigid concepts. He mocked those who built perfect systems, as if they were mathematicians of existence. To him, these systems were attempts to domesticate reality, to force artificial order onto something that is, by nature, wild and multiple. That's why he wrote in Twilight of the Idols, "The more abstract a concept is, the more it hides reality." Wayne, Nietzsche urges us to question convenient truths, to be suspicious of ready-made answers, and to distrust those who speak in the name of God, science, reason, or morality, as if they own the truth. Real thought doesn't need to be the only voice in the room. It shines by its power, not by its exclusivity, and that changes everything. To think like Nietzsche is to move through the world with alert eyes, but without a fixed map, to prefer 1,000 vibrant perspectives over one dead truth, to accept that life is interpretive, and that this isn't a flaw, but a gift, a chance to create, to connect, to explore. Nietzsche knew many people would reject this view. Most people want certainty. It makes them feel safe. But he believed a few, the strongest, freest, most life-affirming spirits, would rise to the challenge. And those would be the true philosophers of the future. Because living thought isn't the kind that repeats dead truths. It's the kind that dances with uncertainty, that turns not knowing into a question, and a question into creation. Nietzsche didn't want to build a new system. He wanted to break all the systems that suffocate real thinking. And maybe his message is even more necessary today. Question what claims to be absolute. Think with your whole being. Embrace pluralism. And above all, dare to create. In many cultures, compassion is seen as a sacred virtue, a sign of kindness, sensitivity, and love for others. And in the Christian tradition, it's at the very heart of morality. To suffer with others, to welcome their pain, to forgive, to give up your own desires out of love. But for Friedrich Nietzsche, this same compassion, when treated as the ultimate moral value, is actually a denial of life, of strength, and of the greatness of the human spirit. Nietzsche isn't attacking empathy as a human emotion. What he's challenging is how Christianity turned compassion into its highest ideal, and in doing so, made suffering sacred, weakness into virtue, and self-denial into a path to salvation. In The Antichrist, one of his most powerful works, Nietzsche writes, "Christianity is a religion of the weak, the oppressed, the unsuccessful, the sick, the deformed. It makes suffering sacred." For Nietzsche, this glorification of suffering doesn't lift people up, it weakens them. Instead of encouraging people to overcome pain, Christianity teaches them to embrace it as a badge of honor, a sign of purity, a step toward heaven. He sees this as a moral trick that, instead of strengthening people, ends up sabotaging life itself. But what's really behind this criticism? Nietzsche believed that Christian morality was born as a reaction from the weak against the strong. Unable to assert their will in the world, the resentful, the dominated, the sick, the spiritually poor, flipped the meaning of values. They started calling everything strong, free, instinctive, beautiful, healthy, and full of life, evil. And everything that was the opposite, humility, obedience, suffering, self-denial, they called good. In that context, compassion isn't just a warm feeling, it becomes a moral weapon. Christianity, by promoting compassion as the highest virtue, asks people to give up their strength in order to identify with the suffering of others. Worse, it praises the sufferer so much that it discourages people from rising above their pain. Anyone who tries to grow, improve, or affirm their own path is called selfish, cold, or unkind. Nietzsche saw this as a threat to civilization. A culture built on this kind of compassion ends up punishing excellence. It turns pity into the moral standard, and the drive to become great into a sin. So instead of challenging the weak to grow stronger, it protects them in their weakness. And instead of honoring those who rise above, it shames them for their vitality. Now, to be clear, Nietzsche is not promoting cruelty or coldness toward people who suffer. What he's criticizing is a kind of compassion that paralyzes people, that creates dependence, that feeds into victimhood, a compassion that's afraid of pain, and in that fear prevents life from blossoming. What Nietzsche wants is a morality that doesn't run from pain, but transforms it into strength. In his view, suffering should be faced, transformed, and overcome, not worshipped. We only become great when we learn to use our pain as fuel for growth, not as something to kneel before. That's why Nietzsche calls for an affirming kind of ethics. One where life, with all its tragedy, is embraced, loved, and turned into creative power. That's also why Nietzsche links Christianity to nihilism. For him, Christian morality denies real life in favor of some future, eternal life. It rejects the body in favor of the soul. It condemns desire, instinct, will, and sensuality, everything that expresses human vitality. And compassion, in this system, becomes a tool for that denial. By glorifying the weak, Christian morality keeps them trapped in their condition and suppresses anyone who tries to break free. Nietzsche saw this as a serious obstacle to the rise of the Übermensch, the Superman. Because the Übermensch doesn't look for comfort, he creates. He doesn't run from tragedy, he transforms it. He doesn't kneel before someone else's pain because of moral duty. Instead, he respects each person's power to face their pain and grow from it. It's a hard perspective to accept. And Nietzsche knew that. He wasn't trying to be comforting. He was trying to wake people up. He knew his critique of Christian compassion would sound brutal, even inhuman. But he believed that only by breaking away from this morality of sacred suffering could humanity grow again. He wrote, "Compassion cripples the will to life." In other words, it blocks movement, it stops action, it kills the instinct to rise above. And for Nietzsche, that's unforgivable. Instead of religious compassion, Nietzsche offers something more demanding, but more noble, affirming life in its entirety. That includes suffering, but not worshipping it. It includes other people, but without erasing yourself for them. It includes pain, but as part of the creative journey, not as a moral trophy. It's important to remember that Nietzsche didn't write for everyone. He wrote for those willing to break with inherited values and build a new way of living. For those people, his critique of Christian compassion isn't a call to be harsh, it's a call to grow up spiritually. The courage to see others as people, not just as objects of pity. The courage to help, not out of guilt or fear, but as a free and conscious choice. The courage to live, not as a servant of a decaying morality, but as a creator of meaning. Nietzsche doesn't offer an ethic of indifference. He offers an ethic of conscious strength, an ethic that sees others, but without losing yourself. That respects suffering, but doesn't glorify it. That values life, not as a wait for paradise, but as a tragic and beautiful expression of being. If Christian compassion teaches us to kneel, Nietzsche invites us to stand, to look life in the eye, to accept chaos, to create through pain, to love fate exactly as it is, and still say, yes, I want to live. Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy is often linked to big ideas like the rejection of traditional morality, the will to power, and the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman. But there's also a more subtle, yet revealing critique running through his work, his criticism of humanist progress. It's not just a challenge to ethics or religion, it's a deep questioning of the modern worldview built on the belief that humanity is steadily marching toward reason, justice, and moral perfection. Nietzsche strongly doubted that belief. For him, the idea of progress as a continuous linear advancement of civilization was nothing more than a modern illusion, based more on hope than on reality. His critique isn't simply about rejecting technology or science. It goes deeper. He challenges the very spirit behind the idea of progress, the near-religious optimism that modernity inherited from the Enlightenment. Modern humanism, born between the 17th and 19th centuries, promoted the belief that with education, science, and rational ethics, humanity could free itself from the darkness of the past, from ignorance, superstition, and barbarism, and build a more just, peaceful, and dignified future. Progress was seen as not just technical, but moral. Human society was supposedly improving. Nietzsche, however, was deeply suspicious of this secular optimism. He saw the ideal of humanist progress as a new kind of faith, just as dogmatic as the religions it was trying to replace. Where there used to be God, now there was man. Where there used to be paradise, now there was the future. Where salvation came through grace, now it came through science and rational morality. He wrote, "They abandoned God, and now they kneel before man." The message is clear. Humanism didn't get rid of the religious mindset. It just replaced the symbols. It kept the same logic, a universal meaning, an absolute truth, a guaranteed direction for history. Nietzsche saw this belief as naive, even dangerous. Why? Because it hides the tragic nature of existence. It covers up the chaos, the randomness, the suffering and violence that are part of life itself. The humanist ideal promises that time and reason will eventually eliminate pain, that everyone will be educated, healed, and made moral. But Nietzsche saw this as a denial of life as it truly is, unpredictable, instinctive, contradictory, and often brutal. For Nietzsche, life doesn't follow a straight path of progress. It's an ongoing struggle between forces. What we call civilization isn't a smooth evolution. It's a constant swing between creation and decay, strength and exhaustion. Modernity, with all its technological progress, hasn't brought more wisdom. It has brought more resentment, more conformity, more herd morality. Nietzsche noticed that behind the face of progressive humanism lies a new kind of weak morality, one that levels everything out. He argued that modern humanism praises tolerance, equality, and solidarity, but often does so at the cost of greatness, individuality, and creative strength. He distrusted a world where everything is harmless, where conflict is avoided at all costs, and where people are raised to fit in, not to rise above. This critique connects, even indirectly, with his idea of the Übermensch. Nietzsche's ideal isn't a better human created through social programs or education policy. The Übermensch is not a product of progress. He is a radical break from what we call progress. He doesn't evolve upward. He breaks free. He creates something new from collapse, not from continuity. In that sense, the Übermensch is beyond humanism. He doesn't believe in historical salvation or automatic collective improvement. He lives in a world with no guarantees, where each person must create their own meaning, not wait for history to deliver it. Nietzsche also warned about the danger of a humanist mindset that tries to numb suffering, treating pain as a flaw that should be fixed or erased. For him, suffering isn't a mistake. It's the soil where creation begins. Great works, powerful spirits, and true transformations are born from facing tragedy, not from avoiding it. By promising a safer, fairer world, humanist progress ends up encouraging conformity, obedience, and fear of intensity. It produces obedient citizens, but not creators. It brings comfort, but not life force. Nietzsche wasn't against material comfort. He was against replacing spiritual depth with social safety. He wrote with biting irony, "The happiness of little men, comfort, health, peace, equality. They call that progress. I call it decay." His critique is provocative because it forces us to ask, what are we really building with all this progress? Are we becoming freer or just more domesticated? Are we growing stronger or just protecting ourselves from all discomfort? Are we creating or just maintaining? Nietzsche didn't believe in a guaranteed future. He believed in individuals who, at every moment, take on the task of creating value. For him, real progress doesn't happen in collective history. It happens in personal transformation. It happens when someone breaks free from what's expected, accepted, or easy, and chooses to live according to their deepest will. That's why his critique of humanist progress, while not at the core of the Übermensch concept, is still essential. Because the Übermensch isn't born from a world that keeps improving. He's born from a world that's collapsing and still says yes to it. He's not the result of cultural evolution. He's the rebirth of spirit in the ruins of broken values. Nietzsche didn't want to improve the human being. He wanted to go beyond it. And to do that, we have to let go of faith in progress and embrace the radical responsibility of individual creation. That's his harshest message, and also his most liberating. And if you made it this far, know this: that alone is a sign of courage. Courage to think for yourself, to question inherited values, to search for a life with more intensity, more awareness, and more truth. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep journey through Nietzsche's philosophy. Each topic, each reflection, each challenge was an invitation for you to truly look at yourself and start walking your own path with authenticity and the will to power. If this content resonated with you, hit the like button. It really helps support the channel and spread ideas that actually make people think. Share this video with someone you believe is ready to break free from mediocrity, someone who wants to step out of the crowd and live more truthfully. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any upcoming videos. Here, we'll keep diving into ideas that can truly transform, from philosophy to real life. Leave a comment below. Which of Nietzsche's insights hit you the hardest? What part of this series made you reflect more deeply on life? Your thoughts matter, and they might inspire others too. And before you go, stay here on the channel. There's a lot more content waiting for you. More videos exploring topics like ethics, self-overcoming, the will to power, and the challenge of being truly free. I'll see you in the next video. Think big, live boldly, become who you are.